All right, so this is the last part of this lecture on leadership, and so we're going to be talking about power. Leadership power, and oh, the power of leadership. I'll be telling you about different types of powers that leaders can have. We're going to be talking about the roles of leaders, what do they actually do, and so some characteristics of being a good leader, or how to be a good leader. Okay, when it comes to the types of leadership powers, this is basically saying what is giving a person the ability to have influence or to lead other people. And so the first one that I want to talk about is reward power. And so this is like the position power that I was talking about before, where you have the ability to use rewards to control employees. So the ability to use rewards such as promotions or raises. And the way that you would use this is that, if you do a good job, maybe you'll have a promotion, or the only way to get a merit raise is if you do well on your annual report. So the ability to grant some type of a reward in order to motivate people and to control people's behavior, to motivate people in that way. Okay, the flip side to that one is the punishment power. And this is the use of sanctions to try to control employee behavior. And so if you have employees that are uh, difficult to deal with, and difficult to deal with in the aspect that they're that when and they may be creating a lot of trouble, like their behavior is more toxic behavior, or if they're just not being able to do their job, you might try to use sanctions against them, such as you might try to discipline them, and eventually it's going to be leading to firing. This one called punishment power. It's easier to reward than it is to punish. And especially if you work in a public organization or public agency, it's very difficult to fire a person. You really have to document. Either way, you really have to document. If you try to use sanctions, it might be with the ultimate goal of firing someone. And so you just have to document that they're not doing their job, and give them low annual evaluations or whatever. But when it comes to public agencies, what happens is they say you have to establish a development plan, of so many months or whatever. And if at that point the person is still not functioning to the level that you think that they should be, there's different techniques that you can use to try to get them to do better, in their particular position. It might be that you want to just like move them around to a different one, to maybe closer to a more productive employee. You may want to reassign them around to different places so that they don't have that same type of organizational culture of their original unit. So there's different techniques that you can try, and you might say that it's punishment, but it's a way to try to influence or try to disrupt that type of disruptive behavior. Try to, engage them in a different way. Then, of course, you have expert power. And expert power just basically says, I know my job and I understand what I need to do. I will let you know what needs to be done, because information is power. If you are the leader, you really need to know what your employees are doing and what they need to be doing. Because if you're going to be delegating, but you're not really sure what that end product is going to be, the one that's going to pay the consequences or has to take the buck stops here. I mean, you are the leader. You're going to have to take ownership of whatever problems that may come from your unit if you're not delegating. If you are delegating and you're not keeping track of what they're doing, or if you don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So information is power. Then comes legitimate power, and that's basically the power that's vested in the position. I was hired to do this job, therefore I do have the power to reward, to punish, to delegate. And this last one, referent power, that's probably one that you're not too familiar with. And sometimes what happens is that in a group, a person will kind of emerge as a leader, but they don't really have any formal type of leadership role. But they do have the ability to persuade others, and it might be because they're really good at doing their job. It might be because people look up to them. It might be because people go to them for advice. So a lot of times it's based on attraction or charisma of one person has to another person. And that you may be, say, a supervisory type of in a supervisory position, but you don't have that legitimate power of being a leader, but you may have referent power, and referent power can be just as powerful as legitimate power. Okay, so what is a leader supposed to do? What are some of the roles of this of his functions as a leader, being an administrative leader? Well, there's numerous ones, and this part does not particularly come from the book; it comes from another book, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. Okay, so the first thing, because I think they're important. The first thing is that the leader has to be able to be the director, and as the director, one of the most important things is that because the goals of the organization and the goals of the particular workers or the members of that particular organization will differ, that leader needs to kind of reconcile those two types of goals. That worker also needs to try to bring unity to the organization's mission and vision statement, saying we as an organization are going to be doing this. So it's kind of like we are going to be doing this. It's not us versus them, it's the we, the unity. As a leader, you need to be able to define problems and to be able to come up with solutions. This is part of what I was telling you about when we talked about the assessment, that critical thinking or the conceptual thinking. You need to be able to define what a problem that may be coming up. Don't wait for them to come. You have to be able to start looking at your organization and say, I see that this may be a potential problem, so let's go ahead and see what may need to be done at some point. And again, reconciling personal and organizational goals, and that's like the goals of the people that work there and the goals of the organization. It's up to you as a leader to provide some type of a bridge between the two, and again, setting boundaries, because you don't want to get too involved in the person's personal life. You don't want to be their sounding board that I had a fight with my husband, my kids are doing this or on drugs or whatever. You know, that's called what, EAS or whatever. You tell them to go to counseling. Now, as a coordinator, I mentioned, and I've said this a couple of times in many different ways, especially when I was talking about organizational theory, is that you are the director, but you can't do the job completely yourself. You need to be able to depend on your people, and you do this by delegating it. But you need to delegate to people that are competent, and only you as a leader can figure out who's are the most competent employees or more competent than others, because it's within a range, right? And so, and you have to offer oversight. And so because organizations are large and they're very specialized, and you're delegating to different tasks to different departments or different people within the departments, then you have to be able to integrate all of these functions and coordinate them to bring them back in to say, this is what the organization is going to be doing, given all of these different reports, some projects that the different departments are doing. So you need to be able to coordinate all these. And as a motivator, we've talked a lot about motivation already, but you have to be able to inspire your followers, the people that are following you. Because again, if I've said it once, I've said it a million times, you cannot be a leader if you have no followers. And so the best way to do it is to use incentives for workers. It might even be praise, but don't make it like feigned praise. It has to be real praise, because if you tell everybody that they're doing a good job and you're always telling somebody that they're doing a good job, it means nothing. That praise means nothing. So reserve it for the times that they really are doing a good job. And more than anything else, you need to use motivation to build cohesiveness within a group, because that leads to the unity that I was talking about just a minute ago. So to build cohesiveness. Now, your book gives a lot on the leader as communicator, because that's what they think is the most important role of a particular leader. And so, communication is kind of a two-way street. And so, you're the director, and you are going to have directives coming down that this needs to be done, and this is how we can do it. You can open it up to input. You can have meetings. There's many different ways that you can do it, but it needs to be two-way. And the reason that I'm saying this is part of that democratic process that I was talking about, that theory Y or theory Z, is that people just want to feel valued. They feel that they don't want to be excluded. They don't want to be shut out. So as a communicator, you have to say, yes, this is the project that or this is the goals that we have to accomplish, but let's talk about how we're going to be able to accomplish it. So I said, it's not always going to turn out the way that a particular worker wants it to turn out, but as long as people seem to have a say in it, they feel more empowered. Okay, so when it comes to feedback, though, when you're in this, so you're having a meeting and you're sitting there, you have to be specific about what needs to be done. How are we going to get this done? Be more, not really task oriented, but more goal oriented. How are we going to meet these goals? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And so you have to look for the cues, for both verbal and nonverbal cues, because some employees will be very verbal in what they're feeling about, or what they're thinking about a certain situation that you may be bringing up. But sometimes you have to look at the nonverbal cues as well, because if you have a worker that's sitting there with their arms crossed and pouty lips, it's kind of like, well, they're not going to say anything, but you can tell that they really don't like what you're saying. The other thing that we talk about when it comes to this, when you're opening up a meeting, or having a meeting, opening it up to some type of feedback, you have to kind of watch it that it's not going to turn into a gripe session. Because whenever there's problems within a workplace and you get a lot of people together, what they want to do more than anything else is complain. So you have to kind of, structure it in a way that that's not going to happen to a large extent. All right, so what makes a leader a good leader? I'm sure you work someplace, any place, and you say, I really liked coming to work. My boss is a good boss because. So these are some of the reasons that you think that this is a good boss because, or why you really kind of like going to this place to work. Okay, first of all, you need to know that you have what your expectations are for your job. They need to be clear. They need to be consistent. You need to know what's expected of you. A good leader needs to treat everybody the same. They need to deal with everybody openly, fairly, and equitably. Treat everybody the same. You have to foster that communication that I was talking about, that it needs to be a two-way street for you to be an effective leader and for this to be like a good place to work. If you are going to try to empower workers, and you're going to be holding these meetings or brainstorming sessions or whatever they're called, focus groups maybe, you need to try to secure consensus. That doesn't mean the majority. That means that most people are going to agree with it. Not everybody's going to agree with it, but it's more democratic and a way, and again, it's a way to empower the workers. Now, one thing that you do not want to do as a leader, you do not want to empire build. You do not want to establish your little fiefdom, because it's divisive in many ways. It will promote disunity. And so this empire building is, these are my favorite people that I work with all the time, and you don't really want that to happen, because that goes against the equity part of it. Treat everybody equitable. And so when you see that your boss has favorites, it's going to start to instill that feeling of a toxic work environment. So you need to build cohesiveness within a group, within the group itself. That's like really important. It's a team. Cohesiveness says, let's function as a team. You need to avoid cronyism and favoritism. That kind of goes along with what I was saying a minute ago, but cronyism is a little bit different, and that's a word that you may not be very familiar with because it's not used too much anymore. But this is one saying, I'm going to hire this person because he's my bud, because he's my homie, because he's my compa. So, if a person's going to be hired and it's going to be working in a unit, it's because they can do the job. So do not play favorites. Do not play favorites. In a lot of ways you could say it might even be nepotism. That's not, in the private sector, that you cannot do that. You have to be able to set a tone for how people that are in your particular organization are going to interact with each other. Whether it's going to be more collegial or more civil, or if it's going to be more hostile, and nobody wants to work in a situation where there's a lot of snipping and snide remarks being made at meetings and stuff like that. That's not a good place to be. So you need to be able to set the tone. You as the leader must be able to set the tone that are going to be consistent with the goals of the organization and the work group. To set the ethos. I introduced that word in the last lecture. You need to set the ethos for that work. I think what bothers me more than anything else, because it's happened to me way too many times, is that when you're working on a project and that somebody else takes credit for your project. Somebody claims it as their own. And so that irritates me more than anything else. So just be very cognizant of that. Okay, so this is the last part that we're going to be doing. This concludes the course. As I said, or the lectures for this course, your final is going to be a reaction paper, and I'll open it up, about a week before the final is due. So listen to all of this. I hope everybody is doing fine. I kind of miss seeing y'all. This is just such an odd time. So please, please, please be safe, stay healthy.